It's not often one hears of a domestic worker being able to disclose her HIV status to her employer. This is especially true in certain communities, including Lenasia, which is predominantly Indian, religious and quite conservative. But domestic workers are considered one of the most vulnerable HIV populations, mainly because of their working conditions and poverty. Domestic worker Elisa is in her 40s and has been working for her Indian Madam AidsZeena for just about 10 years. She decided to disclose her status without fear when she found out she was HIV positive about 4 years ago.
My employer just tell me to go to the clinic, go make the test, because all the time I was sick. I was weak all the time. That's why I went to the clinic. I was scared. Whatever they tell me is okay. So I went to the clinic. They did tell me I'm positive. So from there I came here to tell my madam that they say I'm HIV positive. Never scared.
What did you know about HIV before you found out you were HIV positive?
There was a lot of people I hear they say they did have that sick, and I know them, but I didn't know that sick to catch me. They say, but that time I went to the clinic, I was okay with everything they were telling me.
Elisa also says that many of her friends fear being fired should they disclose their status to their employers.
I didn't scare of them. I say whatever they say to me is okay. That's why I tell them the truth. Because I know the other people, if they go to the clinic, they just talk the lies, going to do that, my child is sick, whatever. So me, I'm telling them straight, I'm going to take my tablets.
Were you scared you may lose your job?
No.
Coming from her nursing background, Madam AidsZeena says she was the one that actually encouraged Elisa to go for HIV testing after witnessing her constantly coughing and being sick. Despite her HIV status, Elisa still handles the food and looks after Madam AidsZeena's grandchildren.
She was losing weight, she wasn't feeling well, and obviously it was affecting her work. And I actually encouraged her. I said to her she needs to go and have herself tested. She needs to go to the clinic because they do the test free, and that's when she actually went to the clinic.
Do you feel that as an employer you had the right to actually enforce her to go for a test?
Well, if she didn't go, I would have had to actually take her to the clinic myself, or I would have had to take her to a hospital or to a GP to have her seen to. But being a nurse and knowing the signs and symptoms of HIV, I somehow deep down knew what she was always having, and I just needed it to be confirmed. And the reason why I encouraged her to go to is because I know they'll be counseling her. So she just had to go to a GP or something and just get the test. There wouldn't be that pre and post counseling. As she needed that, and I know they do a good job at the clinic.
When she came to tell you that she was HIV positive, what was your initial reaction?
She was very concerned when she told me, but I sort of encouraged her and I supported her, and I said to her she mustn't worry, that she would get better, taking the medication. I wasn't shocked, I wasn't concerned about the spread of infection because I know how it spread, and I just wanted her to get better. Having the background of her mom being sick and having died of HIV, I didn't want her to go through the same ordeal. And knowing she had 4 children, I just wanted her to get treatment and get well.
You've been living in this community for a really long time. What would you say is the perception of domestic workers with HIV among, say, the Indian madams?
Oh, well, not good. I would say that not only HIV, but I also think with TB, they would definitely lose their jobs. So even if they do the jobs, they would be just doing the very menial type of outside work.
The question of whether to disclose or not could pose serious labor challenges. In many instances, domestic workers are not knowledgeable of the legislation that says that they do not have to disclose their status, and should they decide to do so, they cannot be fired. Dr. Wasila Jasad from the Health Systems Trust says domestic workers.
Actually, there aren't really good statistics looking at domestic workers in particular. I think it's something related to the nature of the employment and that it's not formalized employment, that we haven't been able to do formal studies looking at prevalence of HIV. What we do know is that the HIV prevalence is very high in young women in South Africa who are of that age that work as domestic workers. We also know that domestic workers are more vulnerable and are considered a vulnerable mobile population. I think because of their poor working and living conditions, because they are isolated and away from home, they often face sexual harassment and gender-based violence. And like I said, the fact that the nature of employment is not formalized and that there are no HIV workplace programs or that health services can't target them for prevention programs, I think all of these make them particularly vulnerable for contracting HIV.
When it comes to the law and disclosing your HIV status, is a domestic worker compelled to disclose their status? And if not, is it encouraged perhaps?
So there are many legal recourses for domestic workers and a few acts which I'll go through. There is the Employment Equity Act, which states very emphatically that any employee is not required to undergo tests if asked by an employer. And there is no legal duty on an employee to even disclose the HIV status. Then there's a Labour Relations Act in South Africa, which says that you cannot dismiss someone if they're HIV positive or have AIDS. You can terminate them for incapacity if they are not able to perform their job anymore, but it has to be through a very fair process and with a fair hearing first. So these are all kind of some of the legal background. And in fact, the Department of Labour has a very good code of good practice which talks about the key aspects of HIV and employment. But disclosure of HIV status is a very important issue. I mean, I think it's something we're thinking a lot about, and in many cases it should be encouraged for an HIV positive to disclose to close family people or the employer if they feel that they're comfortable to do this and that there's no risk, because there are many benefits to disclosing HIV status.
But let's face it, Wasila, I mean, it sounds very idealistic that, you're not obliged to disclose, and if you have a comfortable relationship with your employer, then yes, you should disclose. But I mean, how many cases do we actually find where domestic workers are comfortable enough with their employers or their madams, as they commonly refer to as, to actually disclose their status and not fear being fired?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think particularly with this group of employees, I think there are definite issues around power relations, So if you say that someone voluntarily tested, is it really voluntary? Because we know the power relations between a madam and a domestic worker. And really, they do fear stigma. They fear dismissal and losing their jobs. I mean, we know from their working conditions that they have little recourse to labour rights protection. They often are in casual or part-time employment. Some of them are foreigners. They don't necessarily know their rights or can exercise their rights. And there are often very unlawful labour practices as well.
Jasat says that employers need to be aware that HIV can only be passed through sexual intercourse and the mixing of blood and bodily fluids. Thus, an HIV-infected domestic worker does not pose any real threat to the safety of their food, children and homes. Zeenat Abdul in Johannesburg.